My principal looked my best friend dead in the eye and, with an air of dismissive authority, told her she was seeing problems where none existed. This harsh pronouncement came directly after my friend, filled with genuine concern, had bravely reported a teacher for what she believed was profoundly traumatizing me. When we, trembling but resolute, attempted to present irrefutable proof, screenshots of unsettling messages, witness accounts, a meticulous timeline of events, merely waved a dismissive hand. His expression hardening, his voice, now chillingly low, cut us off with a stark warning. False accusations have severe consequences, girls. Remember that. What more could we do against such an unyielding wall of authority? Defeated and utterly disheartened, we simply turned and left, the weight of his words pressing down on us like a physical burden. That harrowing encounter unfolded a year ago. This morning, however, an unexpected headline plastered across the front page of the news brought a strange sense of closure. Principal Hayes announces retirement. The irony was not lost on me. It all began when I was a sophomore, a time when the tumultuous currents of high school life felt particularly overwhelming. Victoria, who had once been the undisputed queen of our social scene, the most popular girl in the entire school, re-entered the academic fray after mysteriously missing the first 4 months of the year. The moment she stepped through the classroom door, the vibrant hum of teenage chatter and rustling papers died an unnerving, almost suffocating dead quiet. It wasn't just silence, it was a palpable stillness, heavy with anticipation and unspoken judgment, as if every single breath was suddenly held in collective suspense. Then a harsh, cutting voice sliced through the tension, rupturing the silence like a thrown stone through glass. There's the girl who got railed and is now a mom at 16. The entire class, released from its brief, shocked paralysis, erupted in a roar of cruel, triumphant laughter. The sound echoed in the room, a cacophony of adolescent cruelty. Later that day, the cafeteria, usually a vibrant hub of boisterous activity, became a stage for her solitary torment. Victoria sat alone, utterly isolated at a table, her head bowed as wads of crumpled paper likely filled with hateful messageware mercilessly flung at her. My gut clenched with a mixture of empathy and indignation. I felt an immediate, undeniable pull to walk over, to simply sit beside her, to offer some semblance of solidarity. But before I could take a single step, my friend's hand clamped firmly on my shoulder, stopping me dead in my tracks. She then pressed a tightly balled up page into my palm. Unfurling it, I saw crude, hateful words scrawled across it. Don't feel bad. She deserves this. She baby-trapped her boyfriend. Instead of going D1 to play football, he's now changing diapers. The raw venom of the message stunned me. Over the next few weeks, I watched Victoria with a morbid fascination, observing as her life at school devolved into an unbearable hell. Teachers, who had once been captivated by her sharp intelligence and innate kindness, now regarded her with thinly veiled disdain, their expressions hinting that she was somehow an embodiment of everything wrong with society. They would answer her earnest questions with biting sarcasm, their tones dripping with condescension, treating her as if her very presence was an unwelcome intrusion. During one particularly excruciating intimacy and safety class, the teacher giving the presentation deliberately and curly maintained unblinking eye contact with Victoria for the entire duration. A silent, damning indictment that twisted the knife deeper. The students, predictably, were no better. Girls who had once slavishly copied her every style choice now whispered "else luck" behind cupped hands as she passed, their voices like venomous hisses. Her once loyal friend group, a tight-knit circle she had cultivated, immediately exiled her, shunning her with a chilling efficiency that spoke volumes about the fickle nature of teenage loyalty. Within 2 brutal weeks, the relentless online harassment and public shaming forced her to deactivate all her social media accounts, severing her last ties to the digital world she had once effortlessly commanded. Yet, throughout this relentless onslaught, I noticed something profoundly remarkable about Victoria, something that defied all expectations. She never allowed the constant, corrosive bullying to turn her spiteful or bitter. Instead, I observed her quietly tutoring special needs kids after school, patiently guiding them through their lessons. I saw her subtly slip lunch money to a freshman who had forgotten his, a discreet act of kindness performed without expectation of gratitude. She always had tampons in her backpack, a silent lifeline for any girl caught unprepared. Nobody ever thanked her for these small, selfless gestures. They simply took what they needed, then seamlessly reverted to pretending she didn't even exist. It was a heart-wrenching paradox. Everything changed on the day I made the impulsive decision to skip 5th period. The night before, my mom had been on another one of her terrifying benders, leaving me bruised and shaken, and I desperately needed a smoke break of brief. Forbidden's rest potatoes stopped my hands from their uncontrollable trembling. I sought refuge in the hidden spot behind the gym, a forgotten alcove safely out of sight from prying cameras, and lit my cigarette, inhaling deeply. I was only halfway through when the crunch of approaching footsteps made my heart leap into my throat. Mr. Peterson, our geometry teacher, suddenly rounded the corner, his presence an unexpected jolt. Everyone adored him. Girls would giggle charmingly when he peppered his lessons with jokes. "Rough day?" he inquired, his voice a soft murmur, as he moved surprisingly closer, encroaching on my personal space. I knew, with a sickening certainty, that I'd been caught. Our eyes locked, and I, my voice barely a whisper, pleaded with him not to tell anyone. "I won't," he responded, his tone surprisingly conspiratorial, his gaze lingering. "I've noticed you've been quite stressed lately." Perhaps I could help you relax, he then added, his words laced with an unsettling undertone I couldn't quite decipher. Before my mind could even process the chilling implications of what was happening, he had deftly maneuvered me, backing me up against the cold, unforgiving wall. His hand, unbidden, began to slide slowly down my arm, a touch that instantly sent a jolt of ice through my veins, paralyzing me completely. My cigarette, forgotten, slipped from my nerveless fingers, tumbling to the ground. Just let me help you, he whispered, his breath warm against my ear, the suggestion now undeniably sinister. Back the F away. The sharp, furious command, utterly unexpected, ripped through the tense silence. Victoria, her eyes blazing with an incandescent rage, rounded the corner, her arm extended rigidly, a canister of pepper spray aimed squarely at Mr. Peterson's face. Her hand, astonishingly, was steady as a rock, even as her voice trembled with the sheer force of her fury. Mr. Peterson, startled and exposed, stumbled backward, visibly scrambling to regain his composure, attempting to play off the grotesque situation. I was just checking on a troubled student, he stammered, his voice feigning concern. You're completely misunderstanding the situation. I saw everything, Victoria retorted, her voice low but piercing, each word a hammer blow. Leave now. The sheer conviction and unyielding authority in her tone made him, astonishingly, actually listen. He muttered something about reporting us for smoking got pathetic, face-saving Threadbare disappearing around the corner, melting back into the shadows of the school. I stared at Victoria, my eyes brimming with a profound, unspoken thankfulness. She told me, her voice still a little shaky, that she had come out for a cigarette too. A rare moment of shared vulnerability. She shrugged off any notion of heroism. I wasn't a hero, she insisted, her gaze meeting mine, just right place, right time. Yet, instead of simply walking away, Victoria walked me straight to Principal Hayes' office, her resolve unwavering. She demanded that something be done about Mr. Peterson, her voice clearer and firm despite the tremor beneath. But Principal Hayes, the very same man who had dismissed our earlier pleas, barely bothered to look up from his computer screen. His indifference a palpable insult. Mr. Peterson has taught here for 15 years without a single complaint, he stated, his voice flat, devoid of any genuine concern. Are you absolutely sure you didn't misinterpret what you saw? He had her pinned against a wall with his hands on her, Victoria insisted, her voice rising with indignation, unwilling to be silenced. Hayes finally turned to me, his gaze patronizing. Is that truly what happened, dear? He asked, his tone brimming with condescension. Sometimes, when we're upset, we perceive things differently than they really are. Then, his gaze shifted back to Victoria, and his voice became even more overtly contemptuous, a sharp, cruel edge to his words. Given your situation, I understand you might be inclined to see problems where none exist. If you didn't want drama, perhaps you should have thought about that at 15. Victoria's face, already flushed with anger and disbelief, instantly flooded with a deeper, painful crimson. Her eyes welled up, glistening with stares of humiliation and rage. And without another word, she abruptly turned and walked out of the office, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Too shy, too scared, or perhaps just too stunned to speak, I instinctively followed her. I desperately wanted to talk to her, right then and there, to offer some comfort. But she was gone, disappearing around the corner before I could catch up. I didn't see her for the next 2 days, an unsettling absence. But when she finally returned, the worst possible thing imaginable happened to her, a new low in her unending torment. I was in algebra class when one of the guys, a notorious instigator who often made the cruelest jokes about Victoria, called me over, a sly smirk playing on his lips, urging me to look at something on his phone. I was reluctant, a deep sense of foreboding washing over me, but he and a few other boys pressured me relentlessly, their insistent nudges and whispers wearing down my resistance, until I reluctantly agreed. He then opened our year group's private Instagram gossip account, a toxic cesspool of rumors and ridicule, and with a cackle of malicious glee, told me to take a look. My stomach instantly dropped, a sickening lurch that left me breathless. There was a post featuring Victoria, but it wasn't her. It was a collection of disgustingly explicit, AI-generated nude photos, her face crudely photoshopped onto someone else's body. The images were utterly vile, a flagrant violation of her privacy and dignity. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, while rising in my throat. Pretty funny, right? He chuckled, turning to his friends behind him, who joined in with their own snickering. I think they genuinely believed I was one of them, complicit in their cruelty. I merely nodded, unable to form words, and quickly excused myself from the room, needing to escape the suffocating weight of their vile mirth. I had seen Victoria earlier in the day, a faint memory now sharpened by panic. So, with a surge of desperate urgency, I immediately went looking for her, my heart pounding in my chest. I found her in that hidden smoke spot behind the gym, the very place where my own crisis had unfolded. She was sitting on the ground, completely alone, her body racked with sobs, silently bawling her eyes out, tears streaming down her face, soaking the dirt beneath her. I didn't even say anything. There were no words that could possibly encapsulate the enormity of her pain. I simply sat beside her, gently placing a comforting hand on her trembling shoulder. After what felt like an eternitizing minutes of raw, painful sobbing slowly turned to me, her eyes swollen and red, her voice wry and broken. "You're the only friend I have left," she whispered, her words tearing at my heart. And then, with a desperate, guttural cry, she lunged into me, burying her face against my chest, clinging to me as if I were her only anchor in a storm. You deserve to know the truth. She pressed against my chest, her voice muffled but resolute. My boyfriend, Jake, isn't the father. He left me when I found out. The revelation hung in the air, heavy and shattering, explaining so much, yet twisting the knife of her torment even deeper. I'm pregnant. The words hung heavy in the air, a devastating pronouncement from Victoria, her voice barely a thread, so fragile it seemed it might snap at any moment. The confession hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. Pregnant, my mind reeled, refusing to process the impossible truth. How could this be real? A suffocating silence followed, broken only by my own shaky breath. But who is the father? I managed to ask, the words barely a whisper, dread coiling like a venomous snake in my gut, already sensing a terrible answer. The name, Mr. Peterson, was a harsh, split sound, a confession ripped from her very soul. It tumbled from her lips, barely audible, before she shattered, dissolving into another wave of heart-wrenching sobs. Her shoulders shook violently, a tempest of despair. My own heart plummeted into the icy depths of my stomach, a lead weight. Peterson. The name resonated with a sickening familiarity. It was him, the very same teacher, the seemingly infallible Mr. Peterson, who Victoria herself had bravely intervened to stop, preventing his predatory grasp from tightening around me. The bitter irony was a cruel twist of the knife. As I enveloped Victoria in a tight, desperate embrace, feeling the tremor of her body against mine, my mind ignited, a frantic carousel of fragmented memories spinning into sharp focus. Each piece of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying precision. Suddenly, everything, every unsettling glance, every seemingly innocent compliment, every disturbing interaction, coalesced into a chillingly coherent picture. Peterson's calculated moves, the unsettling confidence in his eyes when he had me cornered, his almost arrogant certainty that he wouldn't be caught. It wasn't just arrogance. It was the chilling assurance of a predator who had perfected his craft. He'd done this before. The thought sent shivers down my spine, a cold premonition of deeper evil. Through gasps and broken sentences, Victoria recounted the insidious beginning, a story that unspooled like a dark, unraveling thread. It had started last year, she explained, when she found herself adrift in the choppy waters of his geometry class, her grades slipping precariously. Like a lighthouse beacon in a storm, Peterson had appeared, offering a lifeline, extra tutoring sessions after school. At first, it had seemed so benign, so genuinely helpful, a dedicated teacher extending a hand to a struggling student. A perfectly normal, even commendable, gesture. But then, the veneer of normalcy began to crack, subtly, almost imperceptibly. His comments shifted, slithering from academic encouragement to something far more personal, more unsettling. He'd praise her maturity, lingering on the words, noting how special she was, how different from the other girls her age. Like a master manipulator, he chipped away at her defenses with carefully chosen words, weaving a web of false intimacy. A heartbreaking self-reproach laced her confession. I should have known better, she whispered, her voice tinged with the cruel wisdom of hindsight. But how could she have? She was just 15, a vulnerable teenager navigating the treacherous currents of adolescence, desperately seeking validation. And Peterson, with his calculated flattery, had made her feel seen, important, even cherished, a potent, intoxicating poison for an impressionable young mind. The inevitable climax of his predatory game arrived one ordinary afternoon. After a tutoring session, he dismissed the others, isolating her, keeping her behind. And that's when it happened, the unspoken horror hanging heavy in the air, a silent scream resonating between us, leaving no room for doubt about the unspeakable act. Why had she remained silent for so long? The question was a rhetorical dagger. Who would believe me? She countered, her voice laced with bitter resignation. It was a stark, brutal truth. Peterson was the untouchable, the most beloved teacher, enshrined in the school's pantheon of heroes. Victoria, on the other hand, was merely the popular girl unfairly labeled by many as stuck-up or arrogant. In the court of public opinion, a 15-year-old girl's word against a pillar of the community. The outcome was a foregone, devastating conclusion. A different question formed on my lips, one that had gnawed at me. If everyone here is treating you so cruelly, if you feel so hated, why did you even come back to school? I asked, genuinely baffled by her resilience. Victoria, her eyes swollen and red-rimmed, wiped away the lingering tears with a shaky hand, a fierce resolve hardening her gaze. I can't let him win, she declared, the words a defiant mantra. I have to graduate. I have to show my baby, my child, that you don't just crumble and disappear when life throws its hardest punches. It was a promise, a vow to herself and the tiny life within her. A beacon of strength in the face of overwhelming adversity. Yet, even that fierce determination was faltering. But now, she confessed, her voice cracking, with these vicious, fake photos circulating like poison, twisting everything. I don't know if I can take it anymore. The weight is becoming unbearable. A surge of protective fury coursed through me. No, I stated, my voice firm, laced with unwavering conviction. We can't just stand by. We have to do something. We absolutely cannot let Peterson escape the consequences of his monstrous actions. A bitter, hollow laugh escaped her lips, a sound devoid of mirth, tainted by past betrayals. Remember what happened in the principal's office? She countered, a stark reminder of our previous, fruitless attempt to be heard. Nobody would listen to us then. What makes you think it would be any different now? Her cynicism was a heavy cloak, woven from experience. I met her gaze, unyielding. Maybe not alone, I conceded, acknowledging the crushing weight of individual helplessness. But together, we could figure something out. We have to. She studied me then, her expression a mixture of disbelief and weary resignation, as if I were utterly delusional. But beneath the surface, behind the shield of her pain, I caught it a faint, almost imperceptible glimmer, a tiny, defiant spark of hope flickering to life in the depths of her tired eyes. Fragile yet undeniable. The bell for the next class was a distant memory. For another 20 minutes, we remained in that quiet corner, the weight of the world momentarily suspended, just talking. It wasn't just idle chatter. It was a desperate, raw exchange, a pouring out of burdens. She spoke of her parents, her voice heavy with sorrow and guilt. The crushing disappointment in their eyes, the relentless, piercing questions about the father's identity, questions she wouldn't answer with the horrifying truth. They'd never believe it, she insisted, a fresh wave of despair washing over her. They'd never believe Peterson, their Peterson, could be capable of such monstrous depravity. The connections ran deeper, more sinister than I could have imagined. Her dad, a pillar of the community, coached the junior varsity basketball team, and Peterson, with his chameleon-like charm, often helped out, lending his expertise. They weren't just colleagues. They were friends, a bond forged on the court, strengthening the impenetrable illusion of his character. And her mom, the ever-present volunteer at school events, a woman who championed educators, had always sung Peterson's praises, extolling him as what a truly great teacher he was. A shining example for their school, Victoria articulated the terrifying consequence, telling them, she murmured, her gaze distant, haunted, would destroy everything. Their entire world, their perception of him, of me, would crumble into dust. A deep, profound understanding settled over me, chilling in its clarity. I knew that suffocating sense of parental disbelief intimately. My own mother, bless her heart, struggled to believe me about anything remotely serious on a good day. On a bad day, she'd likely twist the narrative, finding some way, however illogical, to lay the blame squarely at my feet. The thought was a shared, silent burden, binding us closer. The piercing shriek of the bell, signaling the end of the break and the return to the mundane, shattered our fragile cocoon of conversation, pulling us back to the harsh reality of school walls. As we slowly rose, Victoria's voice, hesitant yet hopeful, broke the silence. Will you sit with me at lunch tomorrow? She asked, her eyes searching mine. Absolutely, I replied without a second's hesitation, the word escaping me before I even consciously formed it. It was a silent promise, a small but vital gesture of solidarity. And then, it happened, a tiny, luminous smile touched her lips, the first genuine glimmer of light I'd seen on her face since I'd stumbled upon her, broken and weeping. It was fleeting, fragile, almost imperceptible, yet it was undeniably real, a fragile blossom amidst a field of thorns. As we walked back into the bustling, unforgiving corridors of the school, a palpable wave of stares, whispers, and judgmental glances washed over us. It was a gauntlet. Look at that, someone sneered, their voice cutting through the chatter like a knife. She'd be the next one to get knocked up if she keeps hanging around Victoria. The venomous words were designed to wound, to isolate, to shame. I felt the burning heat of anger rise within me, but I swallowed it, refusing to give them the satisfaction. I ignored them, my gaze fixed forward. Victoria, however, was a master of such public crucifixion. With an almost superhuman strength, she held her head high, her chin tilted ever so slightly, moving with the same defiant grace she always had, a silent testament to her enduring spirit. That night, sleep was a distant, unattainable luxury. My mind was a whirlwind of anxieties and sickening revelations. How Victoria found the strength to face each day, to even walk through those school doors, continued to baffle me, filling me with a profound, almost reverent admiration. My thoughts spiraled, fixating on Peterson, the architect of this monstrous deception. How many other young, vulnerable girls had he preyed upon? How many lives had he irrevocably scarred? The chilling possibility was a relentless torment. And yet, he remained a seemingly unblemished figure, still teaching, still coaching, still basking in the glow of being everyone's favorite teacher, while Victoria, his victim, was systematically dehumanized, treated like discarded trash, scorned and reviled. The injustice was a burning fire in my gut, demanding action, driven by an urgent, almost desperate need to fight back. I grabbed my laptop, its cool metal a stark contrast to the heat of my fury, and started searching. What exactly was I looking for? I couldn't articulate it, but a nascent hope flickered, perhaps other complaints, a hidden whisper of scandal, anything that might offer a lifeline, a chink in Peterson's armor. My frantic search led me to the school's official website, and there it was, Peterson's bio page, a pristine digital monument to his manufactured excellence. Teacher of the year 3 times over, the glowing text proclaimed. Coached the math athletes to state championships. Extensive volunteer work with troubled youth. Each laudatory phrase was another stab to my churning stomach, a wave of nausea washing over me. The sheer audacity of his public persona, the stark contrast to the predator lurking beneath, was sickening. On paper, he was an unimpeachable paragon of virtue, a saint among men. How could anyone, confronted with such an impeccably crafted facade, ever even begin to believe Victoria's raw, painful truth? It was a fortress built of lies, impenetrable to the outside world. No wonder, I thought with bitter certainty, nobody would ever believe her. The night wore on, a relentless, fruitless quest. I delved deeper, sifting through archived online yearbooks, poring over faded images from years past, desperate for any anomaly, any subtle pattern, any whispered rumor. A single telltale sign that anyone, had ever noticed the rot beneath Peterson's gleaming exterior. But there was nothing. Just an endless parade of smiling photos, Peterson, radiant and charismatic, perpetually surrounded by adoring, grateful students and beaming, trusting parents. It was a perfectly constructed illusion, seamless and terrifyingly effective. The next morning, the heavy shroud of my sleepless nights still clinging to me, I found Victoria at her locker before the first bell shrieked its jarring summons. She looked utterly drained, a ghost of her former vibrant self, but there wasn't an unyielding steel in her gaze. Deep, bruised-looking circles underscored her eyes, testament to her agonizing night, a testament that even layers of carefully applied concealer couldn't fully obscure. Yet, despite the exhaustion etched on her face, there was an unmistakable spark of fierce determination. "I've been thinking all night," I confessed, the words a weary echo of my restless hours. "We can't just stumble into this. We need to be smart, strategic, almost surgical in our approach." She simply nodded, her expression conveying a profound understanding. "Me too," she admitted, her voice hoarse, barely slept. It's a constant battle, trying to snatch moments of rest between the baby's feedings and the relentless anxiety churning like a tempest in my stomach. Her struggle was a visceral, painful reality. The path through official channels was clearly blocked, a dead end paved with skepticism and disbelief. We both knew, with a chilling certainty, that trying to report him formally again would be futile, a Sisyphean task. "Nobody will listen," I reiterated, the bitter truth hanging between us. "So we have to find another way. A different door, a hidden passage." A thought grim but resolute solidified in my mind. "We need to start by uncovering if Peterson has done this to anyone else," I proposed, articulating the unspoken horror. At my words, Victoria's face visibly darkened, a shadow passing over her features, confirming a silent, agonizing fear she had harbored. A silent pact was formed. We would split up, becoming clandestine investigators, sifting through the subtle currents of the school grapevine. Our approach had to be delicate, almost imperceptible. No direct accusations, no blunt inquiries, just casual, carefully crafted conversations designed to probe for any lingering discomfort, any weird experiences, or unsettling anecdotes connected to Peterson. Like forensic linguists, we would search for the hidden meaning between the lines, the unspoken truths. Victoria would subtly engage with girls in her own grade who'd endured his geometry class in previous years, tapping into their collective memories. My mission would be to cautiously check in with sophomores currently trapped in the web of his lessons. The plan was set. We would reconvene at lunch, in our designated sanctuary, to pool our findings, to compare notes from our cautious expeditions into the past and present. Each second of the morning seemed stretched to an agonizing eternity, the clock's hands crawling at a glacial pace, amplifying the tension coiling in my stomach. During English, fate placed me next to Samantha, a quiet girl who, I knew, had Peterson for third period geometry. This was my chance. "Hey, how's geometry going?" I asked, forcing a light, conversational tone, as if discussing the weather, desperate to match the urgent weight of my true intention. She responded with a non-committal shrug, her voice flat. "It's fine," the bland, almost dismissive answer. I pressed on, a little more directly but still feigning casual curiosity. "Is Peterson really as great as everyone makes him out to be?" I ventured, watching her carefully. That's when it happened. A strange, almost imperceptible shift crossed her face, a flicker of something unreadable, a fleeting shadow. Her pencil, which had been furiously scribbling notes, paused mid-sentence, suspended in the air. "Yeah," she finally said, her voice oddly stiff. "He was helpful. If you needed it." The qualification was subtle, but it hung there, pregnant with unspoken meaning. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, she abruptly turned away, her attention suddenly, intensely riveted on her notes. Effectively shutting down any further conversation for the remainder of the period, her body language screamed closed. By the time lunch arrived, my own stomach was a knot of frustrated anxiety. I had managed to engage 6 different girls in conversation, attempting my carefully constructed probes. A pattern quickly emerged. 3 of them had responded with the exact same weird look Samantha had displayed. It was a subtle transformation, but undeniable closing off, a subtle hardening of their features the instant Peterson's name left my lips, as if a protective barrier had instantly erected itself. Even more tellingly, one girl had actually started to formulate a sentence, her lips parting as if to confess, only to clamp them shut, shaking her head. "Never mind," she'd mumbled, her voice trailing off into an uncomfortable silence, the unspoken words hanging heavy and potent in the air. Victoria was already there, a solitary figure at our table, the one tucked away in the farthest, most isolated corner of the cavernous cafeteria. It was a desolate outpost, perpetually bathed in the incessant, irritating hum of the perpetually broken vending machine. Nobody else dared to venture into that sonic wasteland anyway, guaranteeing us a semblance of privacy in a place designed for maximum exposure. Her frustration was palpable. She sat hunched over, absently picking at her sandwich. Her appetite clearly vanished, her usual vibrant energy dimmed to a low, simmering resentment. Her own findings mirrored mine with chilling accuracy. "Same thing," she reported, her voice laced with defeat. Girls would start to say something, you could see it in their eyes, then they'd just stop, like they thought better of it. Like they were scared. The most potent reaction she'd encountered, she recounted, came from a junior named Lauren. When Victoria had merely mentioned Peterson's tutoring sessions in a neutral tone, Lauren's eyes had instantly welled up, a single, glistening tear escaping and tracking a path down her cheek. The unspoken message was deafening. But when Victoria, her voice a strained whisper, finally managed to ask if she was alright, Lauren practically bolted. A blur of panicked movement. Her lunch tray, abandoned with a jarring clatter, became a silent testament to her frantic escape, leaving a palpable tension in its wake. We knew, with a gut-wrenching certainty, that we were skirting the edges of something dark and undeniable, yet a wall of fear kept everyone else silent. My mind, still buzzing with the raw fear from the cafeteria, reached back to a chilling detail from one of those true crime podcasts my mom, in her rare moments of quiet sobriety, used to get lost in. The hosts often hammered home a stark truth: predators weren't satisfied with a single victim. They operated with chilling precision, adhering to discernible patterns, types, and methods. Peterson, it was becoming terrifyingly clear, had a particular predilection for vulnerable girls. Girls whose academic struggles made them pliable, whose need for help could be easily twisted into dependency, girls who, due to their circumstances, would be dismissed, their cries for help falling on deaf ears. Victoria, in a cruel twist of fate, fit this profile with horrifying precision. She was undeniably pretty, popular even, yet beneath that gleaming facade, she wrestled silently with algebra and geometry. Her parents, blinded by Peterson's carefully cultivated image, trusted him implicitly, a trust that made her, ironically, even more exposed. Who would ever believe her over such a pillar of the community, a supposedly dedicated educator? A chilling question echoed in the cavernous space of my mind: how many other girls, over the years, had mirrored Victoria's predicament? How many had sat in his classroom, under his watchful, calculating gaze, feeling utterly trapped, their pleas unheard in the silent confines of their fear? After the bell signaled the end of our suffocating school day, Victoria had to embark on her routine journey to pick up her baby from her aunt's house. Her aunt, a stoic woman with a perpetually worried frown, generously watched him during the long school hours, a solitary beacon of support among a family that had, for the most part, regretfully written Victoria off. I offered to join her, a gesture of solidarity, but she shook her head, a tired sigh escaping her lips. "My aunt already thinks I'm a bad influence on you," she murmured, her gaze distant. "She says hanging out with a teen mom will just ruin your future." Till the sting of her words lingered, a reminder of the relentless judgment Victoria faced. Instead of accompanying her, I detoured to the hushed, cavernous sanctuary of the school library. With a determined resolve, I began extracting yearbooks from the last 5 years, their worn covers and crisp pages a tangible timeline of past students. The librarian, a woman whose keen eyes missed little, gave me a long, peculiar look, a silent question hanging in the air, but thankfully, she didn't voice it. I burrowed into my task, methodically compiling a list of every girl who had ever graced Peterson's geometry classes. Then a meticulous, almost obsessive cross-referencing began, pitting my list against the meticulously compiled honor roll lists. I was hunting for anomalies, for the sudden, inexplicable mathematical brilliance that seemed to bloom solely within the confines of Peterson's classroom. It was excruciatingly tedious work, a painstaking process of flipping pages, comparing names, and scrutinizing grades, each entry a potential piece of a disturbing puzzle. But amidst the monotony, a chilling pattern began to emerge, stark and undeniable. Every single year, without fail, 2 or 3 girls would mysteriously transform from struggling C or D students into high-flying achievers in Peterson's math class. The most damning detail, their grades in every other subject remained stubbornly stagnant, a testament to the focused, almost surgical, nature of this academic surge. Only math, under Peterson's tutelage, seemed to defy the laws of average. My phone became my clandestine camera, its lens capturing page after page of this incriminating data. I ensured each shot was crystal clear, every name, every grade progression, an irrefutable piece of what we desperately needed: evidence. Tangible, undeniable proof that could stand against the weight of Peterson's reputation. That very night, as the digital glow of my phone illuminated my darkened room, Victoria's text message vibrated, pulling me from the edges of sleep. Her baby, she wrote, had been inconsolable for hours, and she was utterly, bone-wearily exhausted. Yet, in that haze of sleep deprivation, a crucial memory had surfaced. Peterson, she recalled with sudden clarity, kept an old-school paper gradebook, a relic of a bygone era, tucked away in his desk, a clandestine complement to the official digital system. She'd glimpsed it during one of their supposedly innocent tutoring sessions. It wasn't just filled with grades. It was littered with his cryptic comments about students, little personal notations. She distinctly remembered seeing her own name, adorned with a constellation of small, hand-drawn stars beside it. At the time, she had interpreted them as a sign of her burgeoning talent, a quiet affirmation that he saw something special in her, that she was finally excelling at something. Now, a cold dread snaked through her, making her wonder, with terrifying clarity, what those stars truly, menacingly meant. The following day at school was a palpable descent into an even harder reality. The AI-generated photos, those digital specters of shame, continued to circulate like a virulent disease, despite the administration's hollow pronouncements of a zero-tolerance policy. Someone, with calculated cruelty, had printed them out and taped them, an ugly mosaic of humiliation, inside Victoria's locker. She tore them down without uttering a single word, her face a mask of resolute defiance. But I saw the telltale tremor in her hands, the rapid, almost frantic blinks as she fought back the stinging tears threatening to betray her composure. In the chaotic rush of the hallway between classes, a gaggle of guys, emboldened by their numbers, unleashed a volley of crude, grotesque comments as we hurried past. Bradley, the football quarterback who carried himself with the entitled swagger of a demigod, actually dared to reach out, his hand darting towards Victoria as if to lay claim. My blood ran cold, and I instinctively stepped between them, my voice surprisingly steady as I told him, with a steel that surprised even myself, to back off. He merely laughed, a grating, dismissive sound, and sneered. Look at you, so protective of your new girlfriend. His cronies erupted in a chorus of derisive laughter, their cruel mirth echoing off the cold metal lockers, each peal a hammer blow to our already fractured peace. Victoria, with a surprising strength, tugged me away before I could launch into a retort. It's not worth it, she whispered, her voice tight with a weariness that belied her years. They're not worth it. It was then, in that moment of simmering rage and forced retreat, that Peterson himself walked by. He slowed, his pace a deliberate, almost theatrical gesture, and his gaze, unsettlingly direct, landed squarely on us. But it wasn't Victoria he looked at, it was me. His expression was a meticulously crafted tableau of concern, radiating a perfect mask of a caring, understanding teacher. Is everything all right? He inquired, his voice a gentle, almost paternal balm, designed to soothe and disarm. My skin crawled, a visceral rejection of his feigned kindness, but I forced myself to nod, a single, terse movement. If you ever need to talk, he offered, his eyes holding mine with an unsettling intensity. My door is always open. Then, as if nothing untoward had transpired, he continued on his way. The rhythmic click of his shoes on the linoleum floor a chilling counterpoint to the turmoil churning within us. Victoria's face, already pale from the day's barrage, blanched further, draining of all color. She leaned in, her voice barely a whisper, a chilling revelation. That's exactly how it started with me, she breathed. The concern, the open door, the insidious offer of help. A wave of nausea washed over me, a sickening realization of the predatory game we were now unwittingly playing. At lunch, amidst the clatter of trays and the din of cafeteria chatter, we huddled, our voices hushed. A desperate plan slowly taking shape, we had to get into Peterson's classroom. We had to find that gradebook. Victoria, her mind now a relentless engine of recall, remembered something crucial. During summer school, she'd helped with the math department inventory, and in doing so, had discovered that she still had access to the main department office. They never changed the locks, she murmured, a flicker of grim determination in her eyes. And she'd noticed teachers habitually stashed spare classroom keys in the supply closet within that office. The window of opportunity presented itself after school when Peterson invariably headed to basketball practice. He was the assistant coach, a man of routine, always gone by 3:30 p.m. and not returning until after 5 o'clock. That precious window, barely an hour and a half, would be our only chance to search. It was a terrifyingly risky gambit, but the truth gnawed at us. We had no other options. No one would talk. The administration, with its bureaucratic indifference, wouldn't listen. The burden of finding proof, of unearthing the damning truth, rested solely, terrifyingly, on us. The rest of the day crawled by at an agonizingly slow pace, each tick of the clock amplifying the tension coiling in my stomach. In geometry class, I watched Peterson teach, a chilling performance of normalcy. He made his usual dry jokes about parallel lines never meeting, drawing a thinly veiled comparison to certain social dynamics in high school. Students chuckled. A few girls smiled at him with the easy trust he so meticulously cultivated. He called on me once, and to my own surprise, I managed to articulate the answer without my voice betraying the tremor in my hands. Good job, he said, his expression unreadable, and then moved on, the interaction unnervingly benign. A profound, disturbing question echoed in my mind. How did he do it? How could he stand there, emanating such an aura of perfect pedagogy, knowing the pain he had inflicted upon Victoria, the subtle attempts to draw me into his web, and the untold others he had likely preyed upon? He was a wolf in sheep's clothing, and the sight of his deceptive charm was almost unbearable. Finally, mercifully, the bell shrieked, a clarion call to action. I met Victoria by the gym, our eyes locking in a silent agreement. We watched Peterson, a picture of geniality, head towards practice, his laughter mingling with that of some players as they reminisced about last week's game. The coast was clear. Victoria, moving with a silent, practiced efficiency, led me to the math department office. The door, as predicted, was unlocked, a testament to the school's lax security, constantly open for teachers rushing in and out. She moved with purpose, heading directly to the supply closet. Inside, hanging from a humble hook, was the key ring, a jangling collection of classroom spares. Peterson's room number emblazoned on a small, unassuming tag gleamed under the fluorescent light. My hands, clammy with nervous sweat, trembled as we walked down the empty, echoing hallway, the silence amplifying the frantic beat of my heart. Peterson's classroom, our target, lay at the very end, past the other math rooms and the tiny, cramped office where his tutoring sessions had so ominously taken place. The key slid into the lock with a satisfying click, turning smoothly. Inside, the room was disconcertingly normal. Inspirational math posters about perseverance adorned the walls, a cruel irony, alongside student work, each piece a testament to youthful endeavor. His desk was meticulously neat, perfectly organized, a coffee mug proudly declaring world's best teacher sitting beside a tidy stack of papers. The very ordinariness of it was chilling. We began our desperate search, Victoria taking the desk drawers, her movements quick and precise, while I tackled the filing cabinet, my fingers brushing against folders filled with lesson plans and student records, each moment a silent race against the clock. The first drawer, a shallow, utilitarian space, yielded nothing but the faint scent of old paper and the echo of our rising hopes, leaving us with a frustrating sense of emptiness. The second drawer, however, was a trove of academic artifacts, stacks of meticulously graded quizzes and exams, their red ink corrections a stark testament to students' struggles and triumphs, neatly arranged as if awaiting a final review. The third contained neatly clipped bundles of attendance sheets, rows upon rows of student names and checkmarks, a mundane record of daily presence, yet each mark representing a life, a story unfolding within the classroom walls. But the lowest drawer, a sturdy, deep compartment, was stubbornly locked, a glint of cold metal on its brass plate immediately signaling that this was no ordinary storage. Our eyes met, a silent, unsettling question hung in the air. What secrets did it guard so carefully? Victoria, with a determined glint in her eyes, quickly spotted a slender, silver letter opener on the desk, its sharp tip now repurposed for a more illicit task. We worked together, our hands fumbling, muscles tensing. As the thin metal scraped against the wood, the soft groan of the drawer protesting before finally, with a satisfying click, it gave way. Revealing its clandestine contents, nestled within, almost reverently, were 3 hefty grade books, their worn covers suggesting years of diligent use. One was for the current academic year, its pages still relatively fresh, while the other 2, slightly more faded, chronicled the academic journeys of students from the past 2 years. These weren't just books, they were meticulously kept archives, repositories of countless academic fates. Victoria wasted no time, her fingers trembling slightly as she snatched them up. We huddled together, sharing an unspoken urgency, our hearts quickening as we began to rapidly flip through the pages, a nervous anticipation building with each rustle of paper. Initially, everything appeared perfectly mundane, even reassuringly ordinary. Page after page displayed neat columns of grades, meticulously recorded scores for assignments and projects the standard, almost monotonous minutiae of a teacher's professional life. Nothing seemed out of place, nothing hinted at the disturbing revelations to come. But then, like a discordant note in a familiar melody, Victoria's finger suddenly stopped, hovering over a particular page, her breath hitched. There they were, small, perfectly formed stars, carefully drawn next to certain names. The air around us seemed to thicken, a chill tracing its way down my spine. In the current year's ledger, 5 distinct names, all girls, bore these curious celestial marks. 3 belonged to juniors, poised on the brink of their final year, while 2 were sophomores, still navigating the complexities of high school. Each star, small yet prominent, seemed to pulse with an unstated meaning, a silent accusation. And what connected them? A striking, almost unbelievable pattern. Every single one of these starred students had demonstrated a sudden, dramatic, and exceptional improvement in their academic performance during the second semester. It wasn't just gradual progress, it was an abrupt descent. We quickly confirmed our growing dread. Flipping back through the 2 previous years' books, the chilling consistency of the pattern became undeniably clear. Page after page, year after year, the stars reappeared. It was an unnerving, almost mathematical uniformity. Stars meticulously placed next to specific names, invariably those of girls, and invariably marking students who had previously floundered, perhaps even verged on failure, only to experience an astonishing, almost miraculous, academic resurgence. The sheer predictability of it was profoundly disturbing. Victoria's gasp shattered the silence. She recognized some of the names, not just as distant acquaintances, but as classmates or former schoolmates. Lauren, a quiet, almost invisible girl, was there, her name emblazoned with not 1, but 3 stars, a triple mark of Peterson's alleged help. Then there was Natalie, a senior who had just graduated last year, her once struggling grades seemingly transformed overnight. And Julie, who had abruptly moved away during her junior year, her departure shrouded in whispers at the time, now making a chilling appearance in these damning records. The impersonal records suddenly became intensely personal, terrifyingly real. With a surge of cold determination, I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying as I began to meticulously photograph every single page adorned with those insidious stars. Each click of the shutter was a silent vow, a desperate attempt to capture irrefutable proof. I zoomed in, adjusting the angle, making absolutely certain that every name, every date, and every incriminating star was crystal clear. Indelible evidence against the insidious pattern unfolding before us. We needed undeniable documentation. A growing sense of urgency pressed down on us, heavy and suffocating. We knew with a certainty that chilled us to the bone, that practice would be letting out any minute now. Any second, Peterson or another teacher could walk in. We had to move with lightning speed, our every action fueled by the terrifying knowledge of the ticking clock. As carefully as possible, we began to slide the heavy grade books back into their hiding place, trying to erase any trace of our intrusion. But as the last book settled, a single, folded piece of paper previously hidden between its worn pages fluttered down onto the dusty bottom of the drawer. It was an unexpected, almost cinematic, reveal. Victoria snatched it up, her fingers uncharacteristically clumsy. It was a small, delicate note, penned on the type of pastel-colored stationery adorned with butterflies or tiny flowers that countless teenage girls favored. The handwriting, a careful, almost childish cursive, spoke of youthful hesitancy, yet also of practiced elegance, a stark contrast to the grim context. The words, carefully inked, twisted like a knife in my gut. Mr. P, thank you for yesterday. I won't tell anyone. Please don't fail me. There was no signature, a deliberate anonymity, perhaps born of fear. But the paper itself, crinkled at the edges, slightly yellowed, and softened from repeated handling, spoke volumes. It looked profoundly old, worn, as if it had been folded and unfolded countless times, kept treasured even by Peterson for what must have been a very long time. The implications were immediate and horrifying. Victoria's complexion drained of all color, her face stark white, almost translucent in the dim light. Her voice, when it came, was a barely audible whisper, thick with dawning horror. I wrote something like this, she confessed, her eyes wide and haunted. He made me write it. The words hung in the air, a devastating confirmation. He had convinced her, preyed on her vulnerability, telling her it was a simple gesture, a way to express her gratitude for his extra help with her math. But now, seeing this other note the true, sickening purpose of his manipulation slammed into her with brutal force. It wasn't about gratitude, it was an insidious form of insurance, a perverse piece of leverage. It was designed to twist the narrative, to make it appear as though she, an impressionable teenage girl, was the one pursuing him, the one initiating the improper conduct, effectively silencing her from ever speaking out. A sudden, jarring sound sliced through the suffocating silence, the unmistakable thud of footsteps echoing in the hallway, growing closer. My heart, which had been racing, suddenly seized in my chest. A cold, icy grip, panic, raw and visceral, erupted. We moved with a frantic, desperate energy, shoving the grade books and the damning note back into the drawer, our hands clumsy with fear. The lock clicked shut with a metallic clang that seemed impossibly loud in the suddenly terrifying silence of the room. The footsteps continued their relentless approach, not hurried or casual, but slow, measured, and agonizingly deliberate. Each step resonated through the floorboards, a chilling countdown to an unknown confrontation. It felt like an executioner's walk, each footfall tightening the invisible noose around us. Just as the door creaked open, Victoria's vice-like grip on my hand tightened, and she yanked me with surprising force, pulling me into the narrow, dusty space behind the door. We barely made it. Our bodies pressed flat against the wall, holding our breath, our hearts pounding a frantic rhythm against our ribs. And then Principal Hayes, his posture stiff and authoritative, strode into the room. His eyes swept across the seemingly empty classroom, a slow, methodical gaze that seemed to pierce through shadows. Our breath hitched as he walked directly to Peterson's desk, moving with an almost preternatural certainty, as if he knew exactly where he was going, exactly what he was doing. He casually opened the very top drawer, not the locked bottom one, but a different one, and extracted a folder, its contents unknown. He briefly flipped through it, a gesture that seemed almost perfunctory, then calmly replaced it and turned to leave, his departure as abrupt as his entrance. The casualness of his actions, his complete disinterest in the locked drawer, sent another jolt of icy fear through us. He wasn't just in the dark, he was involved. We remained frozen in our cramped hiding spot for what felt like an eternity, but was perhaps only 5 agonizing minutes, barely daring to breathe. Every muscle in my body ached from the tension, and the silence that followed Hayes' departure felt even heavier than his presence. When we finally dared to move, my legs felt like jelly, shaking uncontrollably, making even the simplest step an arduous task. Victoria, her face still ghostly white, looked profoundly ill, her hand pressed against her stomach as if she might vomit at any moment. The sheer emotional toll of what we had witnessed was overwhelming. Stealthily, cautiously, we slipped out of the classroom, our movements hushed and furtive, and locked the door behind us. The click of the latch a final punctuation mark on our harrowing discovery. The physical escape brought little relief. The dread clung to us like a second skin. We found ourselves drawn to the empty bleachers outside the gym, the cool metal a stark contrast to the burning confusion in our minds. Huddled together, we tried, with varying degrees of success, to untangle the knotted threads of what we had just witnessed, to make sense of the unbelievable horror. Hayes' suspicious visit to Peterson's desk, the damning constellation of stars in the grade book, the chilling confession in the crumpled note, and the terrifying, consistent pattern stretching back for years. Each piece of evidence, when viewed together, formed an undeniable, horrifying tapestry of abuse and complicity. The sheer scale of it was almost incomprehensible. Victoria broke the silence, her voice hoarse with conviction. "We have to tell someone," she insisted, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and righteous anger. But then, the immediate, paralyzing question followed. But who? Who could we possibly trust? The principal, whose quiet visit confirmed his clear, if unspoken, involvement, was obviously out. What about the school board, an abstract entity of authority? Or the police, with their formidable power? But then, the chilling reality of our situation sank in. Would they even believe us? Would they take seriously the word of 2 teenage girls, armed only with blurry phone pictures and a wild, almost unbelievable story? The doubt was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Our combined evidence felt flimsy, easily dismissed. A few grainy images on a phone, juxtaposed with an extraordinary, almost fantastic narrative. "We need more," I asserted, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. "We need another voice. One of those other girls, one of the star students, needs to speak up, to corroborate Victoria's terrifying account. Only then will we have the credibility to be truly heard." Victoria nodded grimly, her gaze distant. "You're right," she conceded, "but none of them will. They're all too scared, just like I was. Just like I still am." Her words painted a bleak, realistic picture of the psychological chains that bound Peterson's victims, the pervasive fear that silenced them. That night, the horrors of the day replayed relentlessly in my mind, making any thought of food utterly repulsive. My stomach churned with a mixture of nausea and dread, and I couldn't bring myself to eat dinner. Fortunately, or perhaps tragically, my mom was already passed out, a common occurrence in our household, so she remained blissfully unaware of my distress, lost in her own chemically induced slumber. My mind was a relentless loop of torment, the names, those chilling stars, flashing before my eyes. A barrage of agonizing questions hammered at my consciousness. How many innocent girls had Peterson, this seemingly benign teacher, truly harmed? How long had this insidious pattern been allowed to fester and checked within the very walls of our school? The implications were staggering, the moral outrage a burning fire in my gut. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I spent hours poring over social media, searching for traces of the names we found in the grade books. Lauren's online presence was a fortress. All her profiles were locked down, impenetrable. Natalie, who had graduated the previous year, seemed to have vanished from social media entirely, leaving no digital footprint whatsoever. Julie's last posts were eerily timed, dating back exactly 2 years, right before her abrupt move. It was as if a dark hand had systematically erased their online lives, mirroring their sudden disappearances from the school's records. Not a single one of them appeared to be actively engaged online anymore, their digital silence a haunting echo of Victoria's own forced social media purge. The consistency was chilling, a horrifying testament to the systematic way Peterson operated, leaving a trail of silenced, scared girls in his wake. Pattern after undeniable pattern, each discovery reinforcing the last, forming an undeniable web of deceit and abuse. The following morning, a terse text from Victoria landed in my inbox. Staying home. Baby has a fever. Can't leave him. A perfectly plausible excuse, of course, a mother's natural instinct. But a cold, insidious thought snaked into my mind. Was this just a convenient reason for her to retreat, to avoid the school, to distance herself from the unfolding horror? The fear was already starting to isolate us. Despite the sudden loneliness, I resolved to press on, replying, understood. I'll keep digging on my own. I knew I couldn't let Peterson's actions go unpunished, even if I had to face the danger alone. Walking into school without Victoria by my side felt like stepping onto a stage under a blinding spotlight, completely exposed. Every shadow seemed to hold Peterson's gaze, every whisper a judgment. I felt an irrational certainty that he would somehow, inexplicably, know what we had discovered, that his eyes would meet mine with a chilling accusation. Yet, he was a master of deception. In class, he was the picture of academic normalcy. He taught his lesson on angles and proofs with his usual practiced ease, delivered his familiar, slightly cheesy jokes, and moved through the room with an unsettling calm. His composure was almost more terrifying than any overt display of anger. But my perception of him had fundamentally shifted. I watch him now with a new, unsettling intensity, a forensic gaze dissecting his every move. And through this magnified lens, a subtle yet disturbing pattern emerged. He consistently gravitated towards certain girls, always the same type, almost as if he were scanning for his next target. His type, I realized with a sickening jolt, wasn't hard to spot. The quiet, introverted students who often sat alone, perhaps hunched over their desks, seemingly trying to disappear. The ones whose eyes betrayed a perpetual weariness, or whose shoulders carried the visible weight of stress and anxiety. He sought out vulnerability, like a predator circling its prey. He indeed had a type, a distinct preference for those he could easily isolate and manipulate. Victoria, however, had been an unusual deviation from his typical prey. Outwardly, she was popular, radiant with a seemingly effortless confidence, a social butterfly. But beneath that polished exterior lay a hidden vulnerability, a deep struggle with math, an academic challenge amplified by the crushing expectations of a family that demanded nothing less than perfection. Peterson, in his perverse genius, had sniffed out that specific weakness, that unique crack in her armor. Lunchtime, usually a boisterous affair, felt oddly isolating as I sat alone at Victoria's empty table, the usual chatter a distant hum. My gaze drifted across the sprawling cafeteria, and there, almost like a beacon, I spotted Lauren. She was tucked away in a corner, surrounded by a small cluster of similarly quiet, unassuming girls, her presence almost blending into the background. Her name, etched with 3 damning stars in Peterson's ledger, immediately flashed into my mind. Up close, even from a distance, the signs were stark. She looked profoundly tired, her face drawn, her frame noticeably thin, almost fragile, as if the weight of some unspoken burden had robbed her of her appetite, or perhaps even her will to eat. Gathering my courage, I pushed myself away from the table and walked directly towards them. Mind if I join you? I asked, trying to sound casual, but my voice felt unnaturally tight. The other girls exchanged confused, slightly wary glances, clearly unused to an outsider joining their quiet circle. But Lauren, after a momentary hesitation, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of assent, her eyes holding a flicker of something unreadable. I settled into the uncomfortable silence, meticulously crafting a facade of normalcy. For a few minutes, I engaged in innocuous small talk, discussing the latest math homework and the drudgery of impending tests, carefully laying the groundwork for the real conversation. Then, with a calculated casualness, I dropped the bait. You know, I'm actually really struggling in Peterson's class right now. The effect was immediate and stark. Lauren's fork, laden with a bite of salad, froze midair, inches from her lips. Her eyes, which had been downcast, shot up to meet mine, wide with a sudden, unspoken alarm. I continued carefully articulating my manufactured dilemma. I've been thinking about asking him for some extra tutoring after school, but I'm just not sure if it's the right move. It was a direct, albeit veiled, appeal, a test to see if she would bite. Lauren slowly, deliberately, placed her fork back onto her tray, the clink of metal against plastic sounding unnaturally loud. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely above a whisper, yet infused with an unmistakable urgency. You need to find a different tutor, she advised, her gaze unwavering. Anyone else? Maybe a student who's good at math, or even some online help, anything. Just don't stay after school with Peterson. Don't do it. Her words, stark and unembellished, were a profound warning. A palpable tension settled over the table. The other girls shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting nervously between Lauren and me, clearly aware of the unspoken implications of her warning. One of them, desperate to defuse the charged atmosphere, quickly, almost frantically, changed the subject to the innocuous topic of the upcoming winter formal. But Lauren's gaze, intense and troubled, remained fixed on me, a silent question, a shared understanding passing between us amidst the sudden flurry of trivial conversation. As the lunch bell shrieked, signaling the end of the period, Lauren quickly caught up to me in the bustling hallway, her shoulder brushing mine, her eyes held a new, cautious intensity. Why were you really asking about Peterson? She pressed, her voice low and serious, cutting through the student chatter. She hadn't been fooled by my act. It was a moment of profound risk, a leap of faith, but I looked her straight in the eye and, with a tremor in my voice, told her everything about Victoria, about the forced notes, about the insidious pattern we'd uncovered, about the sickening betrayal. I laid bare the terrifying truth of what Peterson had done, and was still doing, to vulnerable girls like them. As I spoke, Lauren's eyes, already shadowed with weariness, slowly welled up, glistening with end tears. Her face crumpled with a raw, agonizing pain. I can't talk about it, she choked out, her voice thick with emotion. I've worked so incredibly hard to just forget, to push it all away. The weight of her past trauma was almost physically visible, a crushing burden she still carried. She confessed that when she had finally mustered the courage to try and tell her parents, they had dismissed her anguish, accusing her of being dramatic and ungrateful to them. Peterson was a benevolent figure, a good man who had simply helped their daughter improve her grades, a dedicated teacher. They couldn't, or wouldn't, see the insidious darkness beneath his facade, twisting her cries for help into a selfish act of ingratitude. Their disbelief was a second, profound betrayal. To escape his pervasive presence, she had even transferred to online school for her entire senior year, severing all physical ties with the institution. But as she explained with a heartbreaking sigh, while the physical distance was real, the haunting memories, the psychological scars, remained stubbornly embedded, refusing to fade, constantly replaying the terror. Would you be willing to help Victoria? I pleaded, my voice soft but earnest, to speak up, to lend your voice, so that people would have no choice but to believe us. To believe her. It was a desperate plea for collective courage. Lauren slowly, painfully shook her head, her gaze fixed on the ground. A profound weariness etched onto her features. I can't, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I can't go through all of that again. The endless questions, the crushing doubt from everyone, the way people would look at me judging, skeptical. It's too much. Her voice trembled with a memory of past pain. She had witnessed, firsthand, the brutal, public crucifixion Victoria had endured, the insidious AI-generated photos designed to shame her, the cruel whispers, the relentless rumors that had torn through the school like wildfire. I couldn't handle that, she reiterated, her voice firmer now, filled with a desperate resignation. Not again. I'm applying to colleges right now, trying to build a future. I need recommendation letters from teachers, from counselors. If I speak out, it could destroy everything. It could ruin my entire future. The practical consequences, the fear of complete devastation, were paralyzing. The weight of her future, hanging precariously in the balance, was too heavy a burden to risk. She simply couldn't afford to have this dark cloud, this insidious reputation, follow her every step. It was a suffocating weight she desperately needed to shed. I understood her urgent need for distance, for a fresh start unblemished by Peterson's shadow, yet a gnawing frustration coiled in my stomach. How many other young, impressionable girls, I wondered with a sickening dread, would quietly endure his predatory gaze, his manipulative whispers, while Peterson, unmolested and unpunished, continued to parade as a respected educator? Lauren, perhaps catching the flicker of disappointment or even a trace of judgment etched onto my features, a silent accusation I hadn't meant to broadcast, offered a quiet, almost whispered, I'm sorry. It was a fleeting apology, barely audible, before she simply turned on her heel and retreated, leaving behind an echoing silence and a fresh layer of unresolved tension between us. Later that afternoon, the hushed, almost reverent atmosphere of the library's study hall offered little solace. My laptop glowed, reflecting my anxious face as I delved deep into the murky waters of online research, frantically searching for any external avenue, any anonymous reporting channel that could bypass the school's seemingly impenetrable wall of silence. Could there be someone, some authority figure beyond the rigid confines of our school administration, willing to genuinely listen? My concentration, however, was abruptly shattered when a quiet rustle announced Brittany's presence. She had slipped into the chair directly opposite me, her gaze curious but guarded. Brittany, a classmate from my English class, was typically a phantom presence always there, yet rarely noticed. She was the epitome of quiet diligence, stellar grades, meticulous note-taking, and a demeanor so reserved she often seemed to merge into the background. A person who meticulously kept to herself. Her sudden, direct question, "What are you working on?" caught me off guard. Instinctively, a defensive shield went up. "Oh, just some research for a project," I mumbled, deliberately vague. She offered a small, knowing nod, a subtle gesture that sent a shiver down my spine. Then, with an almost imperceptible movement, she slid a precisely folded piece of paper across the table towards me. "Lauren told me you were asking about Peterson," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Before I could even process the words, before any coherent response could form on my lips, she rose swiftly and was gone, vanishing as quickly and silently as she had appeared, leaving the ominous paper and a swirling vortex of questions in her wake. My fingers trembled slightly as I carefully unfolded the paper, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't just a paper. It was a damning, digital artifact, a screenshot of text messages, frozen in time. The initial exchanges appeared innocuous enough, Peterson's familiar number clearly displayed, inviting a student to meet him after school for what was ostensibly extra help. But then, a cold dread began to seep into my bones as the conversation took a chilling, predatory turn. His subsequent messages, no longer disguised as academic support, began to probe, asking if she had told anyone about their sessions, insinuating a need for secrecy. The language then twisted into sickening flattery, calling her special, explicitly stating he could help her with more than just math. The veiled threat, the insidious suggestion, hung heavy in the air, radiating a palpable sense of manipulation and abuse of power. It was a chilling testament to his twisted intentions, a stark contrast to the innocent facade of extra help. My hands, betraying the turmoil within, shook uncontrollably as my eyes devoured each word, each chilling line. This wasn't mere conjecture, not just a gut feeling or whispered rumor. This was proof. Concrete, undeniable, incontrovertible proof. The sheer weight of it, the undeniable validation, spurred me into immediate action. My fingers flew across the keyboard, texting Victoria without a moment's hesitation. The phone rang almost instantly. It was her, calling from her aunt's house, her voice already laced with apprehension. In a breathless torrent, I recounted everything: Lauren's initial reluctance, Brittany's courageous act, and most importantly, the horrifying contents of those text messages. On the other end of the line, Victoria's composure fractured. She began to cry, but these were tears of sorrow or despair. No, these were profound, cathartic tears of sheer relief, a visceral release of months of doubt and torment. "I wasn't crazy," she choked out between sobs, the words imbued with a newfound strength. I wasn't alone. In that moment, the isolating burden she had carried, the agonizing question of her own sanity, dissolved. The proof showed that other girls, innocent and vulnerable, had also been ensnared in Peterson's insidious web. Through her tears, a steely resolve began to solidify. We agreed, with a newfound urgency, to convene first thing tomorrow, to meticulously dissect this burgeoning mountain of evidence and formulate our next, critical steps. We now possessed a tangible weapon, a powerful arsenal of truth, but how to wield it effectively, that was the paramount question. Peterson, we instinctively knew, wasn't some bumbling amateur. He had honed his predatory craft for years, perfecting his methods, carefully selecting his targets, and always ensuring his own protection. He was a master manipulator, cloaked in the veneer of respectability, seemingly impervious to consequence. If we were to stand a chance against such an entrenched, calculating adversary, we couldn't merely be careful. We had to be infinitely more cunning, more strategic, more meticulous than he had ever imagined. That night, sleep was an impossible luxury. Every nerve ending buzzed with a potent cocktail of fear and determination. I became a meticulous archivist, painstakingly creating multiple copies of every single piece of evidence we had amassed. The damning photos I'd secretly taken from the grade books, those stark visual indicators of Peterson's twisted favoritism, were duplicated. Brittany's courageous screenshot, the irrefutable digital fingerprint of his predation, was likewise safeguarded. I didn't just save them once, I emailed them securely to myself, then immediately forwarded them to Victoria, ensuring both of us had independent access. For an added layer of security, a small, unassuming flash drive became a digital vault, holding duplicates of everything. The chilling thought that lingered was, what if our phones were confiscated, or lost, or damaged? With these backups etched into the digital ether and stored physically, we would always, irrevocably, possess the proof we needed. It was a silent, desperate act of defiance against the potential for their disappearance. Sleep, a distant, mocking promise, eluded me almost entirely. My mind, a relentless projector, replayed agonizing scenarios. Peterson, standing at the front of his classroom tomorrow, his voice calm, his smile reassuring. An utterly convincing facade of normalcy. Was he already silently surveying his next target, meticulously weighing his options, perhaps even initiating the insidious process of grooming someone new, right under everyone's unsuspecting noses? The very notion, the vivid imagery of his continued predation, sent a wave of nausea washing over me. A burning, almost unbearable conviction took root. We had to stop him. But then, the cold, hard reality would crash down, extinguishing that fiery resolve like a splash of icy water. We were merely kids, barely more than children, still navigating the tumultuous currents of adolescence. And he was Peterson, the beloved teacher, the respected figure, the one with an unblemished reputation. Who, in their right mind, would ever choose to believe us two emotional teenagers over such an esteemed pillar of the community? The power imbalance was staggering, a chasm we seemingly couldn't bridge. The following day, a palpable sense of renewed purpose hummed in the air. Victoria was back at school, a testament to her resilience. Her baby's fever had finally broken, and her aunt, a lifeline of support, was able to watch him, granting Victoria a precious window of time. Though her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, betraying the sleepless nights and relentless worrying, her jaw was set, her gaze unwavering. She was undeniably determined. We rendezvoused in a secluded corner before the first period bell could shatter the fragile morning calm, our voices hushed, our plan meticulously laid out. This time, we agreed we would attempt one final, direct confrontation with the administration. But this wouldn't be a vague accusation or a hesitant appeal. This would be an undeniable presentation. We would bring everything, the damning photos from the gradebooks, the irrefutable text message screenshots, every single piece of evidence meticulously gathered, laid bare for them to see. If Principal Hayes, once again, chose to turn a blind eye, to dismiss our pleas as near teenage drama, then our path was clear. We would escalate. We would go straight to the superintendent. And if they too remained stubbornly deaf to our cries for justice, then we would carry our truth to the very highest authority, the school board itself. Surely, someone in this vast educational system, someone with a shred of moral integrity, had to care that a teacher, a supposed guardian of young minds, was actively preying on vulnerable students. Someone, somewhere, simply had to possess the courage and the power to stop him, to sever his insidious hold. Together, a united front, we marched into the main office, the fluorescent lights humming an indifferent tune above us. The secretary, a formidable gatekeeper with a perpetual air of mild annoyance, barely lifted her gaze from her computer. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her tone flat, already signaling an obstacle. "It's urgent," we insisted, our voices imbued with a quiet desperation. She let out a weary sigh, a dismissive roll of her eyes telegraphing her skepticism. But nonetheless, she picked up the phone and connected us to Principal Hayes. Moments later, he emerged from his inner sanctum, his face a mask of barely concealed irritation, the lines around his mouth etched with the stress of his administrative duties. "I have exactly 5 minutes before a meeting," he stated, his voice clipped, making it clear we were an inconvenience. We trailed behind him into his office, a cramped space filled with stacks of papers and the faint smell of stale coffee. Victoria, taking a deep, fortifying breath, spoke first, her voice clear despite the tremor she must have felt. "Principal Hayes," she began, "we have compelling evidence that Mr. Peterson has been acting inappropriately with students." Hayes, however, offered not a flicker of surprise, but a long, exasperated sigh. "We've been through this before, girls," he said, his words dripping with a weary familiarity, implying that our concerns were old news, already dealt with, or simply invalid. That's when I unleashed our arsenal. With a surge of defiant energy, I pulled out the neatly printed photographs, the meticulously captured gradebook pages, emblazoned with those telltale, suspiciously consistent patterns of sudden, inexplicable star grades for certain students. Hayes barely deigned to glance at them, his eyes flitting over the images with a practiced indifference. "Dramatic improvement," he asserted with a dismissive wave, "isn't evidence of anything except good teaching. Young ladies," his words were a cold slap. An immediate attempt to invalidate our months of painstaking observation. But I wasn't deterred. Next, I presented Brittany's screenshot. This, finally, elicited a reaction. His expression, previously unreadable, suddenly shifted, a flicker of something akin to genuine concern, perhaps even alarm, crossed his face. He took the paper, his eyes now intently studying the chilling text messages, the casual creepiness radiating from the screen. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his voice sharper. "A student gave it to us," I replied, my voice steady. Someone else Peterson had targeted, another girl trapped in his web. He carefully placed the paper back on his desk, his gaze hardening as he fixed it on us. "This is a very serious accusation," he stated, his voice now imbued with a paternalistic warning. "If you are mistaken, you could irrevocably ruin a man's entire career. Do you truly comprehend the gravity of that?" Victoria, her eyes flashing with a raw, undeniable pain, leaned forward. "Mr. Peterson already ruined my life, Principal Hayes," she countered, her voice trembling but firm. "I am 16 years old and I have a baby, all because a teacher I trusted, a man who was supposed to guide me, callously took advantage of me. How in any universe is his career more important than that?" Hayes, clearly unnerved by her visceral honesty, visibly flinched. He quickly regained his composure, however, saying he would look into it, instructing us to go to class and let him handle it. But his tone, far from reassuring, struck a discordant note. It was too calm, too facile, too utterly dismissive. Like a practiced script designed to placate rather than genuinely address the monstrous implications of what we had revealed. A cold certainty settled in my stomach. He wasn't going to do a thing. As we exited Principal Hayes' office, the weight of a familiar, crushing defeat settled over us once more, heavier this time, perhaps, for the brief flicker of hope we had allowed ourselves. "He's not going to do anything," Victoria stated flatly, her voice hollow, mirroring the despair in my own heart. "He'll probably just warn Peterson, and then it'll get even worse." The chilling logic of her words resonated deeply. I could only nod in weak agreement. We needed a different strategy, a more audacious plan, and we needed it now. As we trudged down the bustling hallway towards our respective classes, lost in our grim ruminations, a voice suddenly cut through the cacophony, calling Victoria's name. We both turned, surprised, to see Mrs. Chen, the formidable AP biology teacher, standing a few paces behind us. Her expression was unusual, not her typical brisk, academic focus. "Girls," she said, her voice softer than we'd ever heard it. "Could we speak after school?" "It's important." We exchanged a bewildered glance before agreeing, a silent yes born of utter confusion. Mrs. Chen was a figure usually reserved for the academic elite, teaching almost exclusively seniors, and she had never, not once, shown the slightest glimmer of recognition for either of us. We didn't have her for any classes, nor had we ever directly interacted. Yet, there was something in her gaze, a quiet intensity, a knowing apprehension that sparked a deep, unsettling curiosity within us, compelling us to accept her unexpected invitation. The rest of the school day crawled by at an agonizingly slow pace, each minute stretching into an eternity of nervous anticipation. In geometry class, Peterson was undeniably off. Gone was his usual slick, confident demeanor. He seemed perpetually distracted, his gaze often darting furtively to his phone, almost as if expecting an urgent message. He even stumbled, visibly faltering, over some basic geometric proofs he typically elucidated with effortless mastery, a rare and telling lapse in his professional facade. At one particularly chilling moment, his eyes, cold and assessing, fixed directly on me for an unnervingly long time, a piercing stare that felt as though he was attempting to bore into my very soul. Dissecting my thoughts, trying to figure something out, I fought to keep my face a blank canvas, my expression utterly neutral. But inside, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Had Principal Hayes, despite his dismissive tone, actually tipped him off about our morning meeting? Did Peterson somehow know we had been in his classroom, gathering evidence, meticulously documenting his transgressions? As the final bell shrieked its release, a cacophony of scraping chairs and chattering students erupted. Then, Peterson's voice, startlingly clear above the din, cut through the noise, directed squarely at me. "Can you stay behind for a moment?" My blood ran colder than a winter's night. Freezing in my veins, "I really have to get to my next class," I managed to stammer out, clutching my books tighter, my eyes darting towards the steadily thinning stream of students. "It'll just take a minute," he insisted, a false, saccharine smile playing on his lips. The terrifying reality began to sink in. Soon, the room would be empty. Soon, we would be utterly, terrifyingly alone. Without another word, I scrambled to gather my belongings, my hands fumbling, and practically bolted for the door. "Wait," his voice snapped, sharper this time, a chilling edge replacing the faint pleasantness. "We really need to talk about your grades, about your immense potential, and how I can specifically help you succeed in my class." The words themselves, if taken at face value, were harmless, even helpful, but the insidious undertone, the lingering gaze, the veiled promise of help that went beyond academics that was anything but innocent. A primal fear surged through me, overpowering any attempt at composure. I didn't walk. I practically fled from the room, escaping the suffocating trap he tried to lay. Still trembling, I practically stumbled into the bustling hallway, my fingers already flying across my phone screen to text Victoria. "He's onto us," I furiously typed. "We have to be so careful." Her response flashed back almost instantly, a chilling confirmation of my own unease. She'd also caught a weird vibe from him in the hall, a lingering, predatory stare that felt like he was actively watching her. The unspoken terror that he knew, that he suspected, hung heavy between us, a shared, suffocating dread. We immediately agreed to an unspoken pact. For the rest of the day, we would stick together, inseparable. In the face of his growing awareness, we found solace, and a crucial measure of protection, in the simple, ancient wisdom of safety in numbers. As soon as the final bell signaled the end of the school day, we hurried to Mrs. Chen's classroom, an eerie quiet having descended upon the usually vibrant hallways. Her room, typically filled with the hum of scientific inquiry, was now deserted, bathed in the muted light filtering through the large windows. The moment we stepped inside, she purposefully closed the door with a soft click, then moved with deliberate intention to pull down the blinds, plunging the room into a hushed, almost conspiratorial intimacy. The sudden closure, the shrouding of our surroundings, sent a fresh ripple of nervousness through me. It felt intensely secretive, almost illicit. Yet, to my surprise, Victoria's demeanor remained calm, almost expectant, as if she instinctively recognized something trustworthy in Mrs. Chen's actions. Mrs. Chen didn't sit at her imposing teacher's desk. Instead, she chose a more informal posture, perching herself on the edge of a student's desk, her gaze sweeping over us with an expression that was both grave and oddly compassionate. Ready to begin what we instinctively knew would be a pivotal, life-altering conversation. Her gaze, perhaps wary but also searching, held us captive for what felt like an eternity, a long moment stretching between us. Then, her voice, a low rumble, finally broke the silence, cutting straight to the chase. "Are you the young women who've been inquiring about Mr. Peterson?" Victoria and I instinctively locked eyes, a silent, apprehensive conversation passing between us, a flicker of shared fear, a nudge of resolve. Then, almost in unison, we offered a hesitant, yet unmistakable nod. A knowing look, not of judgment but of understanding, softened Mrs. Chen's features. She revealed that Lauren and Brittany, perhaps with a touch of desperate hope, had mentioned our quiet investigation. a burgeoning determination to do something, and now Mrs. Chen was here not to observe from the sidelines, but to actively participate. Her words carried a weight of quiet resolve. I want to help you. Victoria, ever the pragmatist, narrowed her eyes. Why do you care? She challenged, a hint of suspicion, born from past betrayals. In her voice, Mrs. Chen met her gaze unflinchingly. Her answer wasn't defensive, but measured, almost weary. Because she began, her voice gaining a quiet intensity. I've been watching, truly watching, for years. And I've seen patterns, disturbing, undeniable patterns. She described the subtle, yet heartbreaking, transformations she'd witnessed over time. Vibrant girls who, almost overnight, would abruptly withdraw from clubs, sports, or even their closest friendships. Their previously effervescent spirits suddenly muted, like candles snuffed out. Girls who, once gregarious and self-assured, became quiet, hunched figures, avoiding eye contact, their laughter replaced by a nervous silence. And then there were the academic anomalies, students whose grades in every other subject remained stagnant, yet whose performance in Peterson's class inexplicably soared. Often from failing to excelling, a red flag flapping in plain sight for anyone willing to see it. 2 years prior, driven by a knowing sense of unease, she had cautiously approached Principal Hayes, hoping for understanding, for action. Instead, she was met with an icy wall of dismissal. He hadn't just shut her down, he had crushed her concerns underfoot, declaring with an air of absolute authority that she was imagining things, conjuring problems where none existed. The conversation had quickly turned chillingly personal. A thinly veiled threat to her livelihood, a stark warning to cease spreading baseless rumors, lest she jeopardize her own career. Stung but undeterred, she had retreated, but her silence was not surrender. Instead, it became a quiet, relentless vigil. She continued to watch, her observations sharpening, her suspicions solidifying with each passing incident, each hushed rumor, each unexplained change in a student's demeanor. Do you have proof? I asked, a sliver of hope mixed with a heavy dose of skepticism in my voice. She shook her head slowly, a gesture heavy with regret. No concrete proof, she admitted, just a lifetime of observation, a gut feeling, and suspicions that have ripened into certainty. But then, her eyes brightened slightly. However, she added, I'm not the only one. I know other teachers who've noticed things, too, quietly, of course. She named them Mr. Rodriguez, the usually jovial Spanish teacher whose smile often seemed a little forced lately, and Miss Park, the meticulous history teacher, known for her sharp intellect and even sharper observations. Like Mrs. Chen, they had, at various times, attempted to raise their concerns, only to be met with the same impenetrable wall of denial and intimidation. Each attempt, a quiet plea for justice, had been summarily dismissed, their voices stifled before they could even gain momentum. Peterson, Mrs. Chen stated, her voice tinged with a bitter irony, is untouchable. He's the golden boy. She painted a picture of a man shielded by his public image, the awards and accolades he consistently secured for the school, glistening trophies that lent him an unassailable credibility. The parents who, charmed by his charisma and their children's sudden academic success in his class, adored him almost blindly, and the school board, who, basking in the reflected glory, truly believed he walked on water, a paragon of educational excellence beyond reproach. Her words hung in the air, a stark, sobering declaration. The only way, Mrs. Chen declared, her gaze firm, the only way to truly stop him, to break this cycle, is to step completely outside the school system. To bypass this entire, complicit structure. Victoria, her brow furrowed in a mixture of confusion and dawning realization, leaned forward. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Without a word, Mrs. Chen reached into her purse, her movements deliberate, and produced a crisp business card. She held it out to us. Printed neatly on it was the name, Detective Sarah Mills, and below that, local police department. The weight of that card felt palpable, a tangible link to a world outside our insular school. Detective Mills, Mrs. Chen explained, her voice grave, specializes in crimes against minors. She will take you seriously, but her next words were a stark warning, a bracing splash of cold water. However, she cautioned, you need to understand the gravity of this. Once you involve the police, everything, and I mean everything, will irrevocably change. The school, in a desperate act of self-preservation, will circle the wagons, closing ranks against you. The entire community will polarize, people taking sides, some fiercely defending Peterson, others condemning him. It will get incredibly messy, incredibly ugly. Are you truly, truly ready for that level of upheaval? My gaze instinctively found Victoria's. She clutched the business card as if its edges were searing hot, as if it held the potential to incinerate her fragile world. I could almost hear the whirlwind of thoughts in her mind, her baby, Jake's accusation, the protective, yet potentially judgmental, gaze of her parents, the daunting prospect of exposing their family to a public scandal. The stakes, I knew, felt astronomically high for her. Things already difficult could spiral into an unimaginable abyss of ugliness and public scrutiny. But then, something shifted, a quiet resolve hardened in her eyes. She drew a deep breath, visibly squaring her shoulders, a silent declaration of inner strength. Her voice, though still soft, carried an unwavering conviction as she declared, yes, I'm ready. The reason was clear, etched on her face, a fierce, protective instinct. She simply could not, would not, allow Peterson to inflict such profound pain on anyone else. Mrs. Chen nodded, her expression one of solemn approval. She promised to contact Detective Mills immediately to arrange a meeting. Her parting instructions were crisp, practical, and imbued with a renewed sense of caution. Gather every single piece of evidence you have. Make multiple copies of everything. And above all, she stressed, a chilling reminder, be incredibly careful. Peterson, she knew, cultivated connections, had friends in high places whose influence could complicate matters immensely. The following 2 days felt like an interminable tightrope walk, every moment steeped in a palpable tension. Peterson's presence, previously a discomfort, now felt overtly predatory. His eyes, cold and assessing, seemed to track our every movement, a chilling, constant surveillance in the geometry classroom, a lingering gaze in the bustling hallways. Even during the supposed sanctuary of lunch, I'd invariably catch him, a dark silhouette, staring intently from across the noisy cafeteria, a silent, unnerving warning. The insidious nature of gossip, fueled by his attention, began to spread. Other students, too, started to notice his disproportionate focus on us. Bradley, a particularly insensitive jock, decided to vocalize the unspoken, blurting out a crude joke about Peterson having a thing for the teen mom and her friend. His cronies snickered, their laughter echoing hollowly, but inside, a wave of revulsion washed over me, a sickening feeling that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just a joke, it was a cruel, twisted reflection of the very predator we were trying to expose, now amplified by ignorance. The fear was real, palpable. Victoria, sensing the increased scrutiny and potential danger, began requesting company for her walk to the car after school, a ritual we started observing daily. It was usually me, a silent solidarity, or one of the dwindling handful of girls who hadn't yet been swayed by the tide of judgment and still dared to speak to her. The day finally arrived. Detective Mills had agreed to a meeting that Saturday, away from the prying eyes of the school, at the local police station. Mrs. Chen, a steadfast anchor, insisted on coming with us, her presence a silent testament of support and reassurance. The police station, to my surprise, wasn't the imposing, fortress-like structure I'd imagined from TV shows. It was just a rather ordinary brick building nestled discreetly downtown, far less intimidating than the stories we carried. Detective Mills, too, defied expectations. She was younger than I'd anticipated, perhaps in her early 30s, her face framed by soft lines that belied the seriousness of her profession. Yet her eyes, though kind and empathetic, held an unwavering directness, and her handshake was firm, professional, instilling an immediate sense of quiet authority. She led us down a quiet corridor to a small, private interview room stark, but designed for confidentiality. Her voice was calm, reassuring, as she motioned for us to sit. "You can tell me everything," she began, her words a clear invitation to unburden ourselves. "There's no judgment here, no rush. Just tell me your truth, exactly as you remember it." Victoria, gathering her courage, began. Her voice, though shaky at first, slowly steadied as she unspooled the entire, harrowing narrative. She spoke of the initial, seemingly benign tutoring sessions, the carefully chosen compliments that had made her feel seen, intelligent, special, and intoxicating validation from a respected adult. Then, the gradual, almost imperceptible shift, the casual touches on her shoulder, a lingering brush against her hand, the way he would prolong their sessions, keeping her after school. The chilling moment when he kissed her, and her entire world had frozen, her body paralyzed by shock and confusion. She described the terrifying escalation from that point, the suffocating fear and profound confusion that had kept her silent, trapped in a web of his making. When the undeniable reality of her pregnancy struck, he had seized the moment, twisting her vulnerability into a weapon against her. He'd convinced her, a chilling euphemism for manipulation, to blame Jake, his words laced with a poisonous logic. "No one would ever believe you, Victoria." A respected, award-winning teacher against a popular girl who's always been a little too free-spirited. "You just look like you were trying to cover up sleeping around." How could she have countered such a narrative? Who would have listened? Detective Mills listened intently, her face impassive, her pen scratching methodically across her notepad. Not once did she interrupt, allowing Victoria's painful truth to fill the silence. When Victoria finally, exhaustively finished, it was my turn. I presented our meticulously gathered evidence, the grainy but damning photos of Peterson's grade books, showing the inexplicable stars meticulously marked next to specific girls' names. Brittany's chilling screenshot of the message. And the compelling, undeniable pattern of academic manipulation that, once observed, stretched back not just months, but years. Detective Mills took her time, poring over each piece of evidence, her expression one of focused concentration. Her questions were precise, cutting through the emotional narrative to the core facts, specific dates, exact times, the exact sequence of incidents. She was relentlessly thorough, yet her demeanor remained gentle, professional, her tone devoid of any hint of doubt or accusation. When we finally concluded, a heavy silence settled in the room. Then, Detective Mills looked up, her kind eyes meeting ours. "I believe you," she stated simply, those 3 words like a balm on raw wounds. A wave of relief washed over me, immediately tempered by her next, more sobering observation. "But believing isn't enough to secure a conviction," she explained, her voice firm with the realities of the legal system. "To build an airtight case, one that can stand up in court, we need more substantial, corroborating evidence." Her next question, though expected, still landed with a thud. "Can you convince other victims to come forward?" I immediately thought of Lauren, of the other whispers, the hushed fears. I explained the profound intimidation, the ingrained fear that kept those girls silent, their stories locked away, inaccessible. Detective Mills nodded empathetically. I understand their fear, truly, she acknowledged, but their testimony, their voices, would be invaluable. It would solidify the case, make it undeniable. Before we left, she handed us a card with her direct number urging us to call immediately if any new details surfaced, if we remembered anything else, or if Peterson's behavior escalated. And then, a chilling addendum. Be careful. Extremely careful. If Peterson even suspects police involvement, she warned, her gaze unwavering. He'll likely try to destroy any evidence, or worse, intimidate potential witnesses into silence. As we walked out of the station, the cool air outside doing little to dispel the conflicting emotions swirling within us. We felt an overwhelming paradox. A fragile flicker of hope mingled with an icy grip of terror. Someone finally believed us. That was monumental. But now, it was irrevocably real. This wasn't just a secret crusade anymore. There would be an official investigation, relentless questions, potentially a full-blown trial. Victoria's parents, insulated until now, would be confronted with the devastating truth. The entire school, every student, every teacher, every administrator would eventually know. In the quiet confines of Mrs. Chen's car, she turned to us, her voice soft but sincere. You two are incredibly brave, she said, her eyes welling with pride. I'm so proud of you, but her words, though comforting, felt dissonant with my internal state. Brave, I didn't feel brave. My stomach churned, a knot of sickening dread tightening in my gut. I felt utterly terrified, on the verge of throwing up, the weight of what we had just unleashed pressing down on me with suffocating force. Monday at school was undeniably, palpably weird. Peterson's usual booming presence was conspicuously absent. Instead, a rather flustered substitute teacher attempted to navigate the complexities of geometry. The moment his absence was noted, the rumor mill immediately roared to life, churning up theories. Whispers snaked through the hallways. He's got the flu, someone speculated. No, he's at some big teaching conference, another insisted. But Victoria and I, our hearts pounding with a mixture of dread and grim satisfaction, knew better. The detective's quiet words echoed in our minds. The investigation had begun. The wheels of justice, however slowly, had started to turn. The summons came during lunch, a curt message from Principal Hayes' office. As we stepped inside, his face was a mask of barely suppressed fury, his jaw tight. He didn't mince words. Did you go to the police? He demanded, his voice low and dangerous. An accusation rather than a question. He then launched into a tirade, insisting, almost yelling, that we should have come to him first. That we should have allowed him the opportunity to handle it internally, as if this grave injustice was merely a disciplinary issue. To my utter astonishment, Victoria, usually so reserved in authority's presence, let out a short, incredulous laugh. A sharp, almost scornful sound that cut through his indignant bluster. She looked him dead in the eye, her voice laced with bitter irony. We tried that, Principal Hayes, she retorted, and you did absolutely nothing. The truth of her statement hung in the air, undeniable and damning. Hayes' face reddened further, but he quickly pivoted to a new tactic, emotional manipulation. He started talking about our responsibility, the damage we were supposedly inflicting. You don't understand the irreparable harm you're causing, he insisted, his voice dripping with false concern. He painted Peterson as a benevolent figure, a good man, a good teacher, whose entire career, his very reputation, would be ruined by these baseless accusations. Then came the insidious question, a psychological weapon aimed straight at our sense of guilt. Do you truly want that on your conscience? For a moment, I felt myself shrinking under his gaze, his words designed to sow doubt. But then, a surge of adrenaline, of righteous anger, broke through. I found my voice stronger than I expected, challenging his framing of the issue. And what about the girls he hurt? I shot back, my voice firm. What about their lives? The irreparable damage he inflicted, does that not matter? Hayes, refusing to acknowledge the validity of my point, merely waved his hand dismissively. Those are allegations, he sneered, unproven rumors. You are destroying a man's career, a good man's career, based on unsubstantiated gossip and gross misunderstandings. And then his voice dropped, taking on a truly menacing tone, sending a jolt of icy fear through me that made my blood run cold. His words were no longer veiled threats, but an explicit warning, chillingly delivered. You should be very careful, he said, his eyes drilling into us. Making false accusations, especially against a respected member of this community, has severe consequences. Legal consequences, the unspoken implication hung heavy in the air. He was threatening us. At that exact moment, Victoria, her face pale but her eyes blazing with a fierce, unyielding anger, pushed her chair back with a scrape and stood up and, "We're done," I stated, the words cutting through the stale air of Hayes' office like a knife. We have nothing left to say without a lawyer present. Hayes' face, usually composed, flushed a deep, angry crimson, a visible surge of temper that tightened the lines around his mouth. But he relented, waving a dismissive hand, allowing us to leave. The tension in the room had been a palpable weight, pressing down on us. In the hallway, the professional veneer cracked. Victoria was trembling, her hands clasped tightly, barely containing their shake. He basically threatened us, she whispered, her voice fragile, barely audible above her own ragged breathing. I nodded, the chilling implication of his veiled words settling heavily in the pit of my stomach. She was absolutely right. The message had been clear, if unspoken. Immediately, we texted Detective Mills, giving her a terse summary of the unnerving meeting. Her response was swift and unequivocal. Document everything. Every single word spoken, every gesture observed. Save any and all emails or messages, no matter how trivial they seem. Build a meticulously detailed paper trail. Her instructions underscored the gravity of our situation, emphasizing that this wasn't just about truth, but about undeniable proof. The rest of that week dissolved into sheer pandemonium. Peterson never returned to school. The substitute, a nervous woman who seemed perpetually overwhelmed, quickly became a permanent fixture. Rumors, thick and insidious, began to slither through the hallways like a venomous fog. Someone whispered Peterson had been arrested, his reputation already in tatters. Another story, more dramatic still, claimed he had fled the state, a fugitive from justice. The actual truth, when Detective Mills finally relayed it, was far less theatrical yet equally damaging. He was on administrative leave, a temporary suspension pending a full investigation. But the damage, irreversible and corrosive, had already begun. Parents, their faces etched with concern and suspicion, started asking pointed questions at school events and in hushed phone calls. The school board, a usually ponderous and detached entity, was suddenly in the thick of it, their involvement signaling the escalating crisis. Then, the inevitable backlash hit, a tidal wave of vitriol designed to silence and discredit. Peterson's supporters, a vocal and aggressive contingent, came out swinging, their loyalty blinding them to reason. A formidable group of parents launched a petition, their righteous indignation practically vibrating off the page, claiming Peterson was being unfairly railroaded, a victim of a vengeful smear campaign. They branded Victoria and me as manipulative liars, desperate for attention, twisting facts for our own notoriety. The AI-generated photos of Victoria, those digital scars on her image, resurfaced with even more malicious captions, alleging she was a scorned woman, hell-bent on destroying a good man simply because he wouldn't reciprocate her supposed advances. It was an absolutely brutal onslaught, a relentless barrage of cyberbullying and character assassination. Victoria, shattered by the renewed torment, missed 3 agonizing days of school, her spirit visibly diminished. To escape the hostile gazes and whispers that followed me like a shadow, I started eating my lunch in the quiet, dusty solitude of the library, far from the buzzing, judgmental hive of the cafeteria. But then, amidst the darkness, something entirely unexpected, a true turning point, began to unfold. Brittany, a quiet girl from our history class, found her voice. With her parents by her side, their faces a mixture of support and grave concern, she walked into the police station. There, she provided a full, harrowing statement detailing Peterson's inappropriate messages and disturbing behavior. Her parents had discovered the insidious text on her phone and, crucially, they believed her, offering her a lifeline of validation. This act of courage was a catalyst. Soon after, Lauren's parents contacted Detective Mills, their tone somber, stating their daughter also had something vital to share. One by one, like dominoes falling in slow motion, girls began to speak up. Not publicly, not in the gossip-ridden hallways of school where judgment loomed, but to the discreet, empathetic ears of the police, to the dedicated investigators who listened with unwavering focus. Mrs. Chen, a beacon of quiet strength, kept us updated, her reports a lifeline in the storm. She revealed that more teachers, emboldened by the growing investigation, were also stepping forward. Their contributions weren't direct evidence of abuse, but rather a mosaic of troubling observations, persistent concerns they had raised over the years only to have them casually dismissed, and unsettling patterns of behavior they had meticulously noticed. Mr. Rodriguez, a veteran teacher with an uncanny eye for detail, provided crucial documentation stretching back 3 years, a damning record of his repeated concerns about Peterson's interactions with female students. And Miss Park, with a quiet fury, handed over emails where Hayes himself had callously told her to mind her own business when she'd attempted to raise legitimate red flags about Peterson's conduct. The investigation, once narrowly focused, began to expand, unfurling like a dark tapestry. It wasn't just about Peterson anymore. It had morphed into a much larger, more disturbing narrative about a deeply flawed system, a system that implicitly protected its own, that actively silenced legitimate concerns, that perpetually prioritized institutional reputation over the fundamental safety and well-being of its students. Detective Mills, a woman of relentless dedication, interviewed dozens upon dozens of individuals, current students, former students who had long since moved on, teachers burdened by unspoken worries, and administrators entangled in the web of the school's hierarchy. The stories, each one a sharp, painful echo of another, were depressingly, sickeningly similar. Young girls, often those struggling with vulnerabilities or seeking mentorship, would find Peterson, who, like a skilled predator, offered a seemingly benevolent hand of help, slowly, imperceptibly, boundaries would erode, dissolving bit by bit, until they were utterly gone. And through it all, the school, with its collective blind eye, merely looked the other way, perpetuating a culture of complicity. The investigation itself, a sprawling, meticulous undertaking, stretched on for months, not weeks, testing the patience and resolve of everyone involved. There were endless depositions, exhaustive evidence reviews, and labyrinthine legal procedures that seemed to drag on forever, a relentless, grinding machinery of justice. Peterson remained suspended, cloaked in the technicality of administrative leave, while high-priced lawyers battled fiercely over every single detail, every comma and clause. The community, meanwhile, remained deeply, bitterly divided, a chasm separating those who vociferously called for his head, demanding immediate retribution, and those who adamantly insisted on his absolute innocence, unwavering in their belief. Victoria and I, caught in the crossfire of this societal schism, continued attending school, enduring the daily gauntlet of judgment from both sides, our existence a constant public trial. Some days were an unbearable burden, heavier than others, the weight of scrutiny almost crushing. The AI photos, like malevolent digital ghosts, kept resurfacing despite our lawyers' multiple, valiant takedown attempts. New, equally insidious rumors spread like wildfire every single week, a constant reminder of the fight. Yet, through it all, we had each other, an unbreakable bond forged in adversity. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, we began to gather others too. Girls who had once been silent, their fear a palpable barrier, started to offer small, knowing nods in the halls, a quiet acknowledgement of shared understanding. Some, when they believed no one was looking, would even whisper a furtive, heartfelt thank you, their courage blossoming in the shadows. Finally, after what felt like an eternity stretched beyond all human endurance, Peterson was arrested. The charges were not merely serious, they were damning, encompassing multiple counts of inappropriate conduct with minors, a horrifying testament to his predation. The evidence, painstakingly gathered over months, was utterly overwhelming. It wasn't just our combined testimonies, powerful as they were, but tangible. Physical evidence investigators unearthed during a meticulous search of his home, chilling photos discovered on his computer, disturbing trophies taken from his young victims, mementos of their stolen innocence. Most horrifying of all was the revelation that his meticulously kept gradebooks, adorned with small, triumphant stars, weren't simply tracking academic progress. They were, in fact, tracking his conquests, a chilling ledger of his depravity. The community, once fiercely divided, exploded in a maelstrom of shock and outrage. Parents who had staunchly defended him were now aghast, their faces pale with a dawning, terrible realization. Others, their voices laced with a blend of regret and vindication, claimed they'd always felt something was off. A sinister intuition finally proven true. The school, reeling from the scandal, held emergency meetings, bringing in a small army of counselors to help students process the trauma. They publicly promised full, unwavering cooperation with the ongoing investigation. In a move that surprised absolutely no one, Hayes announced his early retirement, citing a sudden, profound desire to spend more time with family. Everyone, with a knowing glance and a sardonic smirk, understood the transparent truth. He was merely escaping before he could be fired, saving face in a spectacular fall from grace. But the absolute best, most profoundly satisfying part of it all, was the seismic shift that occurred among the students. The very ones who had relentlessly tortured Victoria, their cruelty once a constant torment, slowly began to back off, their bravado evaporating under the harsh light of truth. Some, remarkably, even offered clumsy, mumbled apologies that many, certainly, but a significant few. The vile AI photos, once a persistent blight on Victoria's existence, finally disappeared, erased from the digital ether. Bradley, one of the primary architects of those malicious images, was suspended for 2 weeks when his involvement was unequivocally exposed. The fallout was immediate and devastating. His coveted football scholarship offers, once seemingly guaranteed, began to be summarily withdrawn. It turns out, colleges, despite their athletic ambitions, have a rather strong aversion to admitting students who create explicit images of minors even if they are AI generated. A valuable lesson learned the hardest way possible. Victoria, who had carried so much weight, so much pain, finally began the long, arduous process of healing. She still had hard days, of course, moments when the shadow of judgment from some lingering detractors would fall upon her. But now, critically, she also had an unprecedented wave of support. Other survivors who understood her pain intimately, teachers who believed in her without question, even some parents who, with tears in their eyes, apologized for their earlier blindness, for not seeing the truth sooner. Slowly, cautiously, she began talking about college again, about the vibrant possibilities of her future, about becoming a social worker herself to help other girls just like her, like us, navigating their own dark storms. The legal process, true to its nature, was agonizingly slow, a tortuous crawl through hearings, delays, and a dizzying array of motions. Peterson's lawyer, a relentless adversary, tried every conceivable trick in the book to get the charges reduced or even dismissed, entirely questioning witness credibility, exploiting legal technicalities, attempting to sow seeds of doubt at every turn. But the evidence, a towering edifice of irrefutable proof, was simply too strong. There were too many brave victims, their voices weaving a tapestry of shared trauma. There was too much meticulous documentation, a paper trail stretching back years, meticulously chronicling his predatory pattern. Eventually, facing an insurmountable mountain of evidence, he took a plea deal. 15 years in prison, mandatory registration as a sex offender for the rest of his life, and an absolute, permanent ban from ever teaching again. Was it enough for the incalculable damage he had inflicted, for the innocent lives he had shattered? No, perhaps not, but it was something. Justice, of a sort, had finally been served. The school district, facing immense public pressure and the undeniable weight of its own failures, implemented significant changes. New, stringent policies governing student-teacher interactions were immediately put into place. Mandatory reporting training became a non-negotiable requirement for all staff. and anonymous tip lines were established, offering a safe, confidential avenue for concerns. They couldn't undo the irreparable damage that had already been done. The scars etched into young lives, but they could, at the very least, try to prevent such horrors from ever happening again. Some people, their cynicism born of deep-seated disappointment, argued it was too little, too late, and perhaps, tragically, they were right. But at least, for the future students walking those same hallways, there was now a glimmer of hope that they might be safer. I testified at one of the final, pivotal hearings, my voice trembling but steady as I recounted that harrowing day behind the gym, how Victoria, with breathtaking courage, had saved me from a fate I didn't yet fully grasp. I spoke of her unwavering strength, of how many other girls she had tirelessly tried to protect, even when the entire school seemed to hate her, reviling her for daring to speak uncomfortable truths. The prosecutor, a sharp, empathetic woman, later told us our evidence of chilling great books, the damning photos, the meticulously documented pattern of abuse had been absolutely crucial. Without that, she stated with grim certainty, Peterson might have walked away scot-free. When I finished testifying, emotionally drained but resolute, Victoria reached out and squeezed my hand. A silent, profound affirmation. We had done it together. Life, as it always does, eventually resumed a semblance of normalcy, as normal as it could ever be after such an ordeal. Victoria, against all odds, against every obstacle thrown in her path, graduated with honors. She walked across that stage, head held high, a vision of resilience, with her baby brother in the audience cheering her on. I still had 2 more years of high school ahead of me, but they felt different, better somehow. The very culture of the school had subtly shifted. People were more aware, more careful in their interactions, more empathetic, more human. It wasn't easy, not by a long shot, to find that nascent spark of bravery within ourselves, to gather the sheer audacity to shatter the silence that had so long protected a predator. In the labyrinth and aftermath, when we felt utterly lost and exposed, Mrs. Chen, a teacher whose quiet strength had always been an anchor in the chaotic currents of our high school lives, stepped into a role far beyond her job description. She became our unofficial mentor, a beacon of wisdom and steadfast support in a world that suddenly felt alien and frightening. Her guidance was incredibly practical yet profoundly empathetic. For Victoria, who was grappling not only with the trauma, but also the daunting prospect of applying to colleges while caring for her baby, Mrs. Chen patiently navigated the bewildering forms and essay prompts, helping her articulate her strengths and aspirations amidst unimaginable adversity. For me, lost in a fog of anger and uncertainty about the future, Mrs. Chen offered more than just advice. She provided a safe space for introspection, helping me sift through my jumbled emotions and nascent interests, gently nudging me toward a path where my experiences could perhaps become a source of strength, guiding me to contemplate what I genuinely wanted to contribute to the world. Her words, delivered with a conviction that resonated deep within us, were a powerful balm. She looked at us, two teenagers who felt more broken than brave, and declared that we had exhibited more sheer, unadulterated courage than most adults she had ever encountered in her lifetime. Could it be true, we wondered, that our desperate actions had truly shifted the foundations of something so ingrained? She believed we had irrevocably changed things, not just for ourselves, but potentially for countless others, suggesting, with a quiet certainty that sent shivers down my spine, that we had saved lives, probably. Was it an exaggeration, a kind attempt to comfort us, or was there profound truth in her assertion? At the time, caught in the whirlwind of simply surviving, I couldn't quite grasp the magnitude of her claim about saving lives. It felt too grand, too heroic for what, to us, was simply an act of desperate necessity. We weren't strategizing heroes. We were just 2 girls who had reached a breaking point, propelled by an almost primal instinct. We simply did what felt unequivocally right, what resonated with a deep, unshakable sense of moral obligation, what absolutely had to be done, irrespective of the terrifying consequences that loomed over us. Peterson's conviction and subsequent sentence made significant waves, dominating the local news cycles for days. While the media, adhering to ethical guidelines, meticulously avoided naming victims, the tight-knit community had an unspoken, almost visceral understanding of precisely whose lives had been appended and then painstakingly pieced back together. Everyone knew, in that way small towns just know. Victoria, demonstrating an incredible fortitude, bravely gave one interview. Her voice, carefully disguised and anonymized, carried a raw, powerful message that transcended her individual story. She articulated a fervent hope that other girls who found themselves in similar, nightmarish situations would find the strength to speak up, that their cries for help would be met not with skepticism or dismissal, but with unwavering belief. She emphasized the critical importance of adults, those entrusted with the sacred duty of protection, actually protecting them, instead of failing them, as so often happens. Her voice, though digitally altered, conveyed a palpable sense of healing, a resolute moving forward. She spoke of her baby, a precious new life, who, she was certain, would grow up in a demonstrably better world because people, finally, had started to listen, to truly hear the whispers of injustice that had echoed for too long. And that, in essence, is really the whole story, stripped of any embellished drama. It was a journey that was messy, undeniably painful, and excruciatingly complicated, far removed from the neatly packaged, dramatic revelations and swift justice you so often see unfold on television screens. There were no sudden, earth-shattering twists, no perfectly timed confessions. It was simply the arduous, often thankless, struggle of 2 teenage girls who, despite their youth and vulnerability, stubbornly refused to allow a predator to continue his insidious pattern of hurting innocent people. They were two girls who, against a chorus of attempts to silence them, found their collective voice, transforming whispers of fear into roars of defiance. They learned, through bitter experience, a profoundly difficult truth, that sometimes, doing the right thing, the absolutely necessary thing, means that everything, initially, gets immeasurably worse, spiraling into a maelstrom of chaos, before it, slowly, painstakingly, begins to get better. But, and this is the crucial point, it does get better. Victoria, a testament to indomitable spirit, is now thriving in college, building a vibrant future for herself and her child. I'm preparing my own applications for next year, wrestling with the exciting yet daunting prospect of choosing a major. I'm thinking deeply about criminal justice, perhaps social work, or even a powerful combination of both, drawn to the idea of ensuring that what happened to us doesn't happen to others, or that those who suffer find the support they desperately need. Oh, and those abhorrent AI-generated photos. The creators faced far more than just the slap-on-the-wrist school punishment we initially expected. As it unequivocally turned out, the act of creating and distributing explicit images of minors, even if those images are AI-generated rather than real photographs, constitutes a serious federal crime in the eyes of the law. Consequently, they are all currently serving community service and navigating the strictures of probation. Their once bright college dreams pretty much shot into oblivion. Good riddance, frankly, if you ask me, a just consequence for such a malicious and damaging act. Peterson is right where he belongs, behind bars in prison, his ability to harm others utterly curtailed. Hayes, the enabler and accomplice, is gone from the school, vanished from our lives like a bad memory. The school itself, while certainly not perfect, feels undeniably safer, a palpable weight lifted from its corridors. And Victoria, she is, without a shadow of a doubt, the strongest person I have ever had the privilege of knowing. She remains incredibly kind, perpetually willing to help others, and steadfastly refuses to let the unspeakable events of the past define the incredible woman she is becoming. She often says that her baby saved her life, providing an unshakable reason to fight when all hope seemed lost. But I, observing her unwavering resilience, truly believe she saved herself, pulling herself from the brink, and in doing so, perhaps saved countless other girls from a similar fate. Their voices amplified by her courage. That's all I've got, laid bare on these digital pages. Thank you for reading this absolute novel. I truly appreciate you making it to the end. I simply had to get it all out, every raw, complicated detail. If you are, by some terrible twist of fate, going through something remotely similar, please, I implore you, speak up. Find someone, anyone, who believes you, who will stand by you. Do not, under any circumstances, give up hope. It gets better. I promise you, with every fiber of my being, it gets better.